Wildlife. We're going to be reading chapters 4, 5, and 6 in this section. Chapter 4, page 28. Big Darrell pulled into a dumpy-looking gas station Eric would have guessed was out of business and got out to work the pump. Fortuna's only got a few streets, Oma explained, while she and Eric waited, so it's real simple to find your way around. Eric almost said what he was thinking, as if anybody could possibly get lost in such a dinky place. All the businesses are closed now, Oma went on, except for this gas station and the tavern. She pointed out to a dilapidated building with a neon beer advertisement in the window. We have to go clear to Crosby for groceries. There's only 11 houses here that still have folks living in them. They had passed a few houses, all of which had a sad, run-down look. Eric wasn't convinced that people actually lived in any of them. There was a lot of old stuff scattered about the yards, too. Rusty car bodies and farm machinery. A bike, a washing machine, a deflated plastic swimming pool. It was hard to figure out why people would keep junk like that around. If it wasn't as if there was nowhere else to put it. There was nothing but empty space out here. He felt his spirits dip even lower. Mom said you sold the farm. Where's your house? He asked, hoping it wasn't one of the ones he'd already seen. Oh, we don't live here in town, said Oma. We still live out at the farm, where your mama grew up. We just sold the land. Jim Lund bought it. Big Darrell still works with Jim every day. You can't imagine Big Darrell not farming, can you? Eric didn't know what to say to that, so he didn't answer. Instead, he said, Where is the farm? I guess you don't remember much from your visit. It was such a long time ago, Oma answered. It's out a ways. Out a ways turned out to be miles down a part dirt and part gravel road off the main highway. It was beginning to get dark. As they jounced along over the ruts, 3 deer appeared, seemingly out of nowhere, running across a field to the right of the truck. Eric knew immediately that they were mule deer, not whitetail like they had in New York. These were the first muleys he'd ever seen. He couldn't wait to tell Patrick about them. Oma noticed him looking at them and patted his knee. We have to be real careful driving at night around here. The deer start moving at dusk. I can't think of a soul who hasn't had a run-in with one, or at least a close call. Can you, Big Darrell? Big Darrell might have shaken his head no, but it was hard to tell. A little further along, Eric was amazed to see a group of about 20 pheasants standing on the edge of the ditch by the side of the road. He couldn't help reaching across to his grandfather to point, crying out, Look, over there, pheasants, a bunch of them. Oh, heavens, there's pheasants all over the place this year, Oma declared. Last year we had a mild winter, so they did real well. Jim Lund was just saying yesterday you can hardly swing a dead cat without hitting one. Eric twisted around in his seat so he could watch the birds until they were out of sight. What are they all doing in the road, he wondered aloud. They're out in the crops all day eating, Big Darrell said, heading back to cover for the night. It seemed to Eric as if his grandfather had spoken in spite of himself, almost as if the words had forced themselves from between his lips. Still, these were more words than he had uttered all afternoon. Encouraged, Eric said, Can we hunt them? Both Big Darrell and Oma stiffened in their seats, and a charged silence filled the truck bed. Finally, Oma said quietly, Big Darrell's too busy for hunting these days. Eric suddenly felt desperate to escape the tense, strained atmosphere in the small enclosure of the truck's cab. His brief feeling of happiness at seeing the deer and pheasants drained away. Oma broke the silence finally, saying in an overly cheery voice, Well, here we are. On the right, the gravel driveway led to a 2-story wooden farmhouse. Eric searched his memory, but he had no feeling or of recognition of the place. He could tell the house had once been painted white, and the 2 shutters that were left had once been red. The roof sagged, and the whole thing sort of slumped to the left, as if it had grown weary of fighting the wind. Everything looked old and poor and ready to give up. There was a big barn, too, and some smaller buildings, and a lot of large farm machinery, like tractors and combines and others we didn't know the names of. As Big Darrell pulled up beside a pile of neatly stacked firewood, Eric pointed to a narrow little building with the shape of a crescent moon cut into the door. Is that what I think it is? He asked. Why, that's the outhouse, Eric, Oma answered. His face must have shown his dismay, because Oma laughed and added, there's a bathroom inside, but the outhouse comes in handy during mud season when the men are out here working and their boots get all dirty. Eric thought, if my feet get muddy, I'm taking off my shoes and going inside. Oma got out of the truck with a low groan. Come on in, she said, but mind the porch steps. One's broken. Stay to the right when you go up. Big Darrell got Eric's suitcases from the truck bed and walked toward the house. Eric's legs were numb from the long ride, and he had to force himself to move. When he slid from the truck seat to the ground, a fierce blast of wind snatched at him, nearly knocking him over. Pushing his hair out of his eyes, he looked around in the gathering darkness. There wasn't another house as far as he could see. There were fields and a straight line of trees to one side of the house, which he figured had been planted in a vain effort to try to break the wind. The trees led to a low area where some scrubby-looking bushes grew. There might have been a pond down there, but it was too dark to tell. The first stars were appearing, and as he looked up at them, he felt dizzy, lost in all the endless space stretching out in every direction. He closed his eyes as he was buffeted by another blast of wind. The wind here was different from at home. Here, it seemed to him to have a will of its own, as if it were determined to clear the land of anything too weak to withstand its relentless pressure. He bent into it and climbed onto the porch, being careful to put his weight on the only two steps that looked solid, and went into the house. Oma stood at the bottom of the stairs that led up to the second floor. I'll show you your room. You go first. These old legs of mine are awful slow. Wordlessly, Big Darrell handed over one of the suitcases, and Eric started up the stairs with it. Oma came next, and Big Darrell followed with the other suitcase. Eric hesitated at the top, then reached for the knob on the first door that he came to. He was about to turn it when Oma drew a sharp breath. No, Big Darrell said, the single word spoken forcefully in his deep, hoarse voice sung in the air. Eric pulled back his hand and, in surprise, and turned around. Big Darrell's face was hidden in the shadows, but Oma's eyes were wide with alarm. Quickly, she recovered herself and gave a small, nervous laugh. Not that one, Eric. The next one, farther down to the right. Slowly, Eric turned to the door across the hall, half expecting another outburst. But Oma opened it and flicked the light switch. Sounding slightly out of breath, she said, Here you are. Without speaking, Big Darrell set the suitcase on the floor in the hallway and went back down the stairs. Oma and Eric stood looking around the room. Just like your mama left it, Oma said. Except, we've ended up storing a few things in here. You know how that goes. A few things, Eric thought incredulously. There was a single bed, covered neatly in a faded blue flowered spread, and a dresser with a mirror attached. But the floor was piled with random stuff. A fake Christmas tree in a stand, a sewing machine, cardboard boxes, and several bulging plastic bags. A narrow path snaked through it all, making it possible to walk from the door to the dresser or the door to the bed. Doesn't anybody around here ever throw anything out? Eric wondered. Oma was looking around, too. With a funny expression on her face, he had the feeling she was really seeing from the room for the first time in a while. I expect we'll need to move some of this to the attic, she said uncertainly. Give you a little more space. When Eric didn't say anything, Oma said, You just go ahead and make yourself at home. Now, while I get some supper started. Eric had a sudden hopeful thought. The school, he said. Is it closed, too, like all the other stores in town? Oh, there's no school in Fortuna, she replied. Wow, he thought. I have actually come to a place so far out in the middle of nowhere there isn't even a school. This news would have been thrilling if he could have thought of the one thing to do here besides going to school. Oma said, You'll be going to Crosby Middle School. I let them know you are coming, and the bus will be stopping for you out by the driveway. Eric didn't know whether to feel disappointed or relieved. He's been trying hard not to think about the prospect of starting school in a new place where he didn't know anybody. But what was he going to do with himself for the next 2 days before school began on Monday? When Oma left, Eric sat on the bed looking around the tiny room. This must be what it felt like to be in a jail cell in Siberia. Except his cell had the added attraction of being filled with junk. Chapter 5. Eric didn't unpack. That would be like admitting he was going to be staying for a while, and part of his mind simply refused to accept that. With nothing else to do, he poked around the room that had once belonged to his mother. Some photos and papers were stuck in the frame around the mirror over the dresser, and he examined them. One picture showed his mom uh, when she was little, standing beside a brown and white calf with a blue ribbon around its neck. She was grinning proudly at the camera. There were several other blue and red ribbons from the Fortuna 4-H, a medal from the school track meet, and a program from a school play in which her part was listed as a blue fairy. There were a couple of shots of her and an older boy, one where they were smiling and sitting on top of hay bales piled in the bed of a pickup truck, another of them dressed for trick or treat. Eric looked closely at the series of school pictures that showed his mother growing from a cute, toothless kid into a cute teenager. In the early pictures, when she was elementary school and middle school age, she looked out at the camera with a wide, easy, confident, and Eric thought, somewhat mischievous smile. But then, in what he figured were high school pictures, something changed. That crinkly eyed, mischievous smile was gone, replaced by a flat, solemn expression. He'd seen kids put on that expression when they wanted to appear cool. Maybe that was what she'd been trying to do, but Eric thought it made her look sad. Oma called to him to say supper was almost ready. He felt uncomfortable entering the living room where Big Darrell was sitting on a worn looking chair watching the news, though he was really glad to see the television. Where there's TV, there's hope, he told himself. From the kitchen, Oma said, Goodness, it's 7:30. We don't usually eat anywhere near this late. Eric, I told your mama you'd call her when you got in. Better do it now so she won't worry. It's 2 hours later there. Eric had forgotten about the time difference. No wonder the day had seemed so long. As he picked up the phone, Big Darrell spoke. That's long distance to New York. Well, duh, thought Eric. I'm the one who just traveled all the way across the country. He turned to look at Big Darrell to see if maybe he was kidding around. Big Darrell had removed the cap he'd been wearing on the drive from the airport, and Eric was momentarily startled by the whiteness of his grandfather's forehead compared to the rest of his tanned and ruddy complexion. His face didn't show a trace of humor. Oma appeared at the doorway between the kitchen and the living room. Oh, he won't talk long. Now will you, Eric? She asked, sounding flustered. So that's what's bugging him, Eric realized. Big Darrell's worried that I'll run up his telephone bill. The cheapskate. I can use my cell phone, he said, reaching into his pocket, but as soon as a connection was made, a message came up saying call was lost. He tried several times without success. Oma, who had been watching, said, I don't know how much about those things, but most folks around here use a certain company. I forget the name. What is it, Big Darrell? Do you recall? Big Darrell shook his head. Well, the name doesn't matter, but it's likely a different. She paused, her brow furrowed as she tried to come up with the right word. Network, Eric suggested. She brightened and smiled at him. That's right. It's different here. It's different, all right, Eric thought. Yeah, I could just email her, he said. She's online a lot. Oh, goodness, said Oma. You need a computer for that, don't you? Eric nodded, his heart sinking. We don't have one of those. I don't really understand what on earth people are doing, staring at those things all day. Eric couldn't believe it. He was trapped in a house without a cell phone or a computer. It was like a nightmare. Oma handed him an old-fashioned telephone with a coiled cord. Here, go ahead and call your mama. I expect she'd rather hear your voice anyhow. When his mother asked, he told her that the plane trip had been torture. She asked a few cheerful questions, but he was having no part of being cheered up. He wanted to tell her how awful everything was, how he couldn't believe she had sent him to this creepy house with her scary, mean old father who never talked, a place that had no school, where his cell phone didn't work, where there were no other kids, no computer, no nothing except junk. Oh, right, don't forget an outhouse. He couldn't say what he wanted to, not with Oma fussing about the kitchen and the great stone face sitting in the living room listening. I've got to go, Mom. Oma's putting dinner on the table. All right, sweetie, said his mom. I'm glad you're there safe and sound. Are you sure you're okay? You sound a little funny. Oh, everything's just great, he said. His mother must have heard the sarcasm in his voice and sighed. We'll call you every chance we get, but it's going to be tricky with the time difference. They tell us we'll be able to email you. That would work, Eric whispered into the phone, if there was a computer here, which there isn't. Yes, I know, but there must be computers at the public library in Crosby, his mother said, and I'm sure they'll have them at school. Eric didn't answer. We can write letters to it, said his mom. It'll be like Pioneer Days. You should like that. Again, Eric didn't answer. Into the silence, his mother said, You will write, won't you? I guess. Meanwhile, you try to make the best of things, okay? And help Oma. Mm-hmm, Eric said without enthusiasm. Try to have a positive outlook, right? Bye, sweetie. I love you. I'm going to put your dad on. Eric waited, knowing that he'd undoubtedly hurt her feelings by not saying he loved her back, but he didn't feel like saying it right then. Eric? Hi, Dad. How's it going? Terrific. His father chose to take the words at face value. Well, that's great. I didn't think it would be as bad as you thought it would be. Actually, it's worse, Eric wanted to say. It's hard to believe we're going halfway around the world tomorrow. We'll stay in the best touch we can, okay, buddy? Okay. We'll see each other before we know it. Yeah, hang in there, son. I love you. Yep, okay. Bye, Dad. Eric hung up and sat at the table, where Oma and Big Darrell were waiting to serve supper. The meal was almost as quiet as the ride from Minot, only now they had a few things to say, like, pass the applesauce, please, and would you like some more peas, and no thanks. After dinner, Big Darrell went upstairs and Oma explained that he kept farmer's hours, going to bed and getting up very early. When Eric turned on the TV and discovered that it only got 3 channels and the picture was fuzzy, he said he was tired too and went to his bedroom. He lay in the bed that used to be his mother's and stared at the ceiling, wondering how he was going to survive 6 months, maybe longer, in this place. He tossed fitfully, mad at himself for not being able to fall asleep, when all he wanted was for the longest and worst day of his life to come to an end. Chapter 6. In the morning, Eric waited until he heard Big Darrell drive off before he came downstairs. It's sugar beet harvest, Eric, Oma explained as she fried some bacon and eggs. Big Darrell's helping out a cousin of Jim's down near Williston, so he'll be out until after dark. When he'd finished his breakfast, Oma told him a friend was picking her up to work on a fall festival they were organizing at the church. She asked him if he wanted to go, but he said no. Well, she said vaguely, I expect you'll be just fine on your own. There are leftovers from last night for lunch. She carefully wrote the phone number of the church on the tablet and set it on the counter. Then her friend's car pulled up outside and she left. It appeared he wasn't going to have to worry about his grandparents smothering him with attention, which was just fine with him. Idly, he turned on the TV, flipped through the 3 channels, checking out the grainy pictures, and turned it off. Then he wandered around the living room, but there wasn't much to see except for Oma's coupon organizer and her knitting patterns, and some farm journals of Big Darrell's. He was surprised to see all of his own school pictures framed and carefully arranged in order, beginning with his kindergarten shot and ending with last year's 6th grade picture, which was a disaster. His mother had taken him to the barber the day before, where he'd gotten scalped. In the photo, he looked like a pinhead with enormous ears. It was weird to think that these strangers out in North Dakota had his photos prominently displayed in the living room. With a sigh, he faced the serious question of what he was going to do to keep from going crazy. No answers came to mind, so he started up to his room. Not that there was anything to do there, either, except rearrange the junk in new and different piles. At the top of the stairs, he recalled the night before, when he'd been out about to go into the room across the hall from his, the one on the left. His grandfather had cried out, "No, sheesh." Sheesh, what was the big deal anyway? He thought of movies he'd seen, in which there was a house with a forbidden room, which turned out to be a horrible secret, or else was once the scene of a gruesome murder. He laughed out loud. How likely was it that anything half that interesting lay behind a door in his grandparents' house in the middle of nowhere? He should be so lucky. Even so, he wanted to open that door. He pretty much had to open that door. He paused, his hand on the knob, feeling he was doing something wrong. That's stupid, he told himself. It wasn't as if he'd been told to stay out. The more he thought about it, the more he wondered if his grandparents had actually reacted as strongly as he thought. Probably the room was really messy, and Oma was embarrassed at the way it looked, the way his mother always acted when company showed up unexpectedly. Though it was kind of hard to imagine what a room could be more disorderly than the one he was staying in. He turned the knob and stepped inside. To his surprise, the room wasn't at all messy, but perfectly neat and tidy. Oddly neat and tidy, he thought, especially compared to the rest of the house. He looked around at the framed photograph on the dresser of a proud, smiling young soldier in uniform, at the American flag on the wall, at the dog tags and the gold heart shaped medal hanging from a purple ribbon, and all at once he understood. This was his uncle's room, the uncle he'd never met, his mother's brother Dan, who had died in Vietnam when his mother was 14. Eric had almost forgotten about Dan. His mother never talked about him. She said it made her too sad. All Eric really knew about Dan was that his mom had loved him and he was dead. It felt wrong to be here. Suddenly, unable to breathe, he left the room that was Dan's shrine and shut the door behind him. That's the end of this section.